The ring was cold on my palm, colder than I remembered. It was just a simple gold band, worn thin on one side where it had rested against my wedding ring for 52 years. Arthur's ring. I had taken to wearing it on a chain around my neck after he passed, but the chain broke last Tuesday and I hadn't gotten around to fixing it. So I carried it in the pocket of my housecoat, a small hard worry stone my fingers would find when I was thinking. My daughter, which is to say my son's wife Susan, saw it in my hand that afternoon. She had that bright, false smile on her face, the one she used when she was about to say something she thought was helpful but was actually just dismissive. "What's that, Alara?" she asked, her voice a little too loud, as if I were deaf and not just old. I opened my hand. The ring lay there, a pale circle of sunlight in my dark palm. "Arthur's," I said. She made a little sound, a puff of air through her lips. "Oh, it's just your old wedding ring, Mom." She used the word mom like a bandage, something to cover the sting of her real meaning. Just an old thing. Unimportant. Taking up space. She didn't know. She couldn't. She didn't know it was the ring Arthur had bought with 3 months' pay from the steel mill, his hands still raw from the work. She didn't know he'd hidden it in a box of Cracker Jack and pretended to be surprised when I found it. She didn't know it was the ring I'd held in my own hand while the doctor told me Arthur's heart had finally given out. It wasn't just anything. It was a testament. It was a life. But I didn't say any of that. I just closed my fingers around it and slipped it back into my pocket. The time for explaining I was beginning to understand was long past. That night, a young nurse came in to check my blood pressure. Her name was Chloe. She had kind eyes and a gentle touch. She never spoke too loudly. She'd been working the night shift all week, and she'd often stop for a minute, after her duties were done, and just talk to me. She'd tell me about her classes, her dream of becoming a head nurse. She'd ask me about my gardenias, whose phantom scent I could still sometimes smell on my clothes. While she worked, she saw the worry on my face. My fingers were rubbing the ring in my pocket. "You okay, Miss Alara?" she asked softly. I pulled the ring out and held it up. "My son's wife," I said, the words feeling dry and brittle in my mouth. "She said it was just an old ring." Chloe looked at the ring, then back at me. She didn't say "I'm sorry." She didn't offer a useless platitude. She just saw. Her eyes for a moment reflected all the history I held in my hand. "It's beautiful," she said. And I knew she meant it. She saw the shine that was left, not the metal that was worn away. Her own hand was resting on the bedrail. I saw she wore no rings at all. Her hands were clean and capable and, I imagined, often lonely. She held my hand sometimes, when the nights were long and the hospital sounds were too sharp. A simple human comfort. A connection offered with no expectation of return. I looked from the ring in my palm to her bare hand. A thought clear and sharp as a shard of glass formed in my mind. Value is determined by the one who holds the object, not by the object itself. Susan saw a piece of old metal. Chloe saw a story. I saw a life that was finished. And my own life was not. I reached out and took her hand. It was warm. I pressed the ring into her palm and closed her fingers around it. She looked startled, her eyes wide. "Miss Alara, I can't." "Yes, you can," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "It's not just an old ring. It's a thank you for holding my hand." I gave it to the kind nurse who holds my hand, because she knew it was worth something. And in that moment I knew I was too. That was the beginning. Not the end, as my son and his wife had likely started to plan, but the true and proper beginning of my own life. The event that put me in the hospital was a fall. A simple thing. I missed the last step coming down from the attic, a box of old photographs in my arms. The fall itself wasn't so bad. A fractured wrist, a bruised hip. It was the lying there that did the damage. Lying on the floor in the quiet house, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, the grandfather clock in the hall ticking away the minutes. It was 2 hours before David thought to call. 2 hours. He called, he said later, because I hadn't answered his text message about dinner plans for the following week. He found me, of course. There was panic and ambulance, the sterile white blur of the emergency room. And then there was the quiet room on the 3rd floor, where the healing was supposed to start. But the real injury wasn't in my bones. It was in the knowledge of those 2 hours. The knowledge that my presence in the world was measured by my response to a text message. I was a task on a to-do list, an appointment to be kept. David and Susan visited every day. They brought grapes I couldn't eat and magazines I couldn't read with my wrist in a cast. They sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chairs and talked. Not to me but at me. Or more accurately, around me. They discussed my condition as if I were a houseplant that had started to wilt. The doctor said she'll need physical therapy. And we can't have her navigating those stairs alone anymore. It's just not safe. Maybe it's time we seriously consider that place over by the lake. The one Marjorie's mother is in. They have a lovely garden. I would close my eyes and feign sleep. It was easier than listening. Easier than seeing the impatience in David's face. The strained sympathy in Susan's. They saw a problem to be managed. A life to be simplified. There's not mine. The day Susan made the comment about the ring was 2 days before I was scheduled to be discharged. They had arrived with paperwork. Forms for in-home care. Brochures for assisted living facilities. They spread them out on the rolling table that went over my bed, covering the spot where my lunch tray usually sat. "We just want to go over some options, Mom," David had said, his voice full of a false heartiness that grated on my nerves. "To make things easier for you, easier for me." It was their favorite phrase. It meant, easier for us to stop worrying about you. It meant, easier for us to contain your life within predictable, manageable boundaries. I had listened, nodding in what I hoped were the right places, my mind 1,000 miles away. I was thinking about my house. The way the morning sun hit the kitchen window. The worn spot on the arm of my reading chair. The smell of soil and rain from my porch garden after a summer shower. These were not things that could be packed into a single room in a place with a lovely garden. That was when Susan had seen the ring. And that was when she had dismissed it. And in that dismissal I saw the sum of all the others. The dismissals of my cooking as too old-fashioned. The dismissals of my stories as repetitive. The dismissals of my wisdom as quaint. My whole life, my whole history with my son, with his family, had been a process of being gently, lovingly, and relentlessly edited. Faded out. Simplified. After I gave Chloe the ring, something inside me settled. The restless, churning anxiety that had been my constant companion for years began to quiet. It was replaced by a cold, calm certainty. I was not a problem to be solved. I was a person to be seen. And if my own family could not see me, I would have to find a way to see myself. The day I was discharged, David and Susan were there to collect me. They had my bag packed. They had a wheelchair I didn't need. They had a plan. "We're going to take you back to your house for now, Mom," David said, helping me into the car. "But we've made an appointment to tour the Willows on Thursday. Just to look." "No pressure," Susan chimed in from the driver's seat. "It'll be fun." "Like looking at a new apartment." I said nothing. I just looked out the window as we drove through the familiar streets of my neighborhood. The trees were older, the houses a little more crowded together, but it was home. My home. For 55 years. I had brought my son home from the hospital to that house. I had waved goodbye to him from that porch on his first day of school. His first date, the day he left for college. I had grieved for my husband in the silence of those rooms. The house was not just a collection of bricks and wood. It was the archive of my life. And they were planning to close it. When we arrived, David fussed over me, helping me up the steps, unlocking the door. "Now you just go sit in your chair and rest," he instructed. "Susan and I will get you settled. We'll order some food in." I did as he asked. I walked into the living room and lowered myself into my reading chair. The worn velvet felt like a familiar embrace. The house was cool and quiet. It smelled of dust and old paper and the faint, sweet scent of the last of my gardenias. Smelled like me. From the kitchen I could hear them talking in low voices. The same hushed, conspiratorial tones they'd used in the hospital. "We'll have to get a company to come in and clear this all out," Susan said. "She's got a lifetime of stuff in here." "It's overwhelming." "I know," David sighed. "Half of it is junk. Old papers, knickknacks. We can just put most of it in storage. She won't even notice, she won't even notice." The words hung in the air, more damaging than a shout. I sat in my chair, my good hand resting on the arm, and I did not tremble. I did not cry. I simply listened. I listened as my son and his wife planned the dismantling of my life, piece by piece, assuming my consent because they had never been required to ask for it. They believed I was fading. They thought the fall had broken more than my wrist. They thought it had broken my will. They were mistaken. The fall had been a shock, like being plunged into cold water. It had woken me up. They brought me a cup of tea, weak and milky, just how I didn't like it. They ordered a pizza, though they knew I didn't care for it. They ate their slices standing in the kitchen, making lists on a notepad. A list of things to do. A list of people to call. A list of ways to make my life simpler. I sipped the tea and watched them. They moved through my house with the easy confidence of owners, not guests. They opened cabinets, peered into closets. My home had become an estate to be managed. When they were ready to leave, they came to stand before me, wearing their concerned faces. "Okay, Mom," David said. "We've stocked the fridge a bit. The home care nurse starts tomorrow at 9. We'll be back on Wednesday to help you sort through some things for the move." He leaned down to kiss my forehead. His lips were dry. A perfunctory gesture. "Get some rest," he said. I looked up at him. And my son. I saw the boy he had been, and the man he had become. A man who loved me, I suppose, in his own way. But a man who did not see me. "David," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I'm not moving." He straightened up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Mom, we've been over this. It's not safe for you here alone." "I won't be alone," I said. "The nurse is coming tomorrow." "That's temporary," Susan said, stepping forward. "Alara, we have to be realistic. This house is too much for you." "This house is mine," I said. I wasn't arguing. I was stating a fact. A fact they seemed to have forgotten. David sighed, that deep, put-upon sigh I knew so well. It was the sound of his patience wearing thin. "We'll talk about it on Wednesday," he said, his tone final. "Just rest for now. Don't worry about anything." They left. I listened to their car pull away from the curb, the sound fading into the evening quiet. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 7. The house settled around me. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time I did not feel lonely. I felt a sense of purpose. They thought the discussion was postponed. They thought they had until Wednesday. They did not understand that the discussion was over. That night I did not sleep in my bed. I slept in my chair, the one that held my shape. I kept vigil. I was guarding my life. The next morning I woke before the sun. The house was filled with a soft gray light. My wrist ached, a dull, persistent throb. I moved slowly, deliberately. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I opened the canister of chicory coffee Arthur and I had always drunk. The rich, dark smell filled the small room. I made 1 cup. Strong and black. Just for me. I took my coffee to the small desk in the corner of the living room. It was Arthur's desk. I hadn't used it for much besides paying bills since he died. I opened the top drawer. Inside was a collection of old pens, paper clips, and a leather-bound ledger. It was the book where my grandmother had recorded births and deaths, where my mother had written down family recipes. I had used it to keep track of important dates. I opened it to a fresh page. The paper was thick and creamy. I picked up a fountain pen, Arthur's favorite, and filled it with ink from a small glass bottle. The process was slow, methodical. It required a steady hand. My hand was steady. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Tuesday, September 14th. And underneath it I wrote a single sentence. My life is my own. I looked at the words. The ink was a deep, defiant black against the pale page. I had written my own Declaration of Independence. The home care nurse arrived at 9 as scheduled. She was a pleasant woman named Maria. She helped me dress and made me a proper breakfast of oatmeal and toast. She was professional and kind. I did not tell her she would not need to come back tomorrow. At 10 o'clock, after Maria had left, I went to the phone. I looked through my old address book, the pages soft and worn with use. I found the number for my church, Trinity M.E. Zion. Pastor John answered on the second ring. "Alara, good to hear your voice," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "I heard about your fall. How are you holding up?" "I'm mending, Pastor," I said. "But I need some advice. I need a lawyer. Not a family lawyer. A good one. A sharp one." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Pastor John was a wise man. He heard what I wasn't saying. "I see," he said slowly. "There's a man in my congregation. A Mr. Henderson. He's a good man. And a very sharp lawyer. I'll give you his number. I wrote it down on the page in the ledger, right below my declaration. The ink from both entries looked the same, part of the same statement. I called Mr. Henderson's office and made an appointment for the next morning. Wednesday morning. The same morning David and Susan were planning to come over and help me sort through things. The timing felt right. After the phone call, a strange energy filled me. It was not the frantic energy of anger, but the calm, focused energy of resolve. I had a plan. I began to walk through my house room by room. I wasn't just seeing memories anymore. I was taking inventory. In the living room on the mantelpiece was the family photograph. It was taken at David and Susan's 20th anniversary party. David stood in the center, his arm around Susan. I was on the end, slightly out of focus. I had always hated that picture. It was a perfect portrait of my place in their lives. An afterthought. An add-on. I took the silver frame down. The glass was cool against my fingers. I opened the back, slid the photograph out, and replaced it with a picture of Arthur and me, taken on our honeymoon. We were young and smiling, and the whole world was ahead of us. I put the frame back on the mantel. Then I took the other photograph, the one of me on the edge, and I slid it into the ledger. Piece of evidence. I went upstairs to the spare room. David called it the junk room, but it was where I kept the things that mattered. It was my quilting room. Along one wall were shelves filled with bolts of fabric. In the corner stood a dressmaker's dummy wearing the half-finished shell of a baptismal gown for a great-grandchild I was unlikely to ever have. And in a cedar chest at the foot of the bed were the quilts. I had made a quilt for each of my grandchildren. For Maya, David's eldest, a grandmother's flower garden pattern, all bright yellows and blues, because she had loved to sit in my garden as a little girl. For the two younger boys, quilts with stars and rocket ships. They had received them, sent polite thank you notes penned by their mother, and I'm sure the quilts were now packed away in a closet somewhere, smelling of mothballs. I opened the chest. The scent of cedar filled the air. On the very top was the finest quilt I had ever made. A double wedding ring pattern. I had started it for David's wedding, but Susan had wanted a modern, minimalist theme. A handmade quilt, she had implied, was too folksy, too old, so I finished it for myself. The stitching was tiny and perfect, the colors rich and deep. It was a masterpiece of love and skill, and it had sat in this chest for 30 years. I lifted it out. It was heavy. The weight of it felt substantial, real. I carried it into my bedroom and spread it over my bed. The colors transformed the room. It went from being a quiet, plain space to a place of beauty and pride. My room. My bed. My quilt. I spent the rest of the day like that, making small, quiet changes. I went into David's old room, which they still called David's room, even though he hadn't lived there for 40 years. In the closet were some of his old college textbooks and a Letterman jacket. I packed them all into a cardboard box. I wrote David on the side with a thick black marker. I left the box by the front door. In the kitchen, I took down the magnetic notepad from the refrigerator, the one Susan had given me, with the heading Things for Mom to Remember. It was covered in her neat, condescending handwriting. Dar. Miller, 2 p.m. Tuesday. Call pharmacy for refill. Don't forget to water plants. I took the list off the fridge, tore it into small pieces and dropped it in the trash. I could remember to water my own plants. Each action was a reclamation, a quiet drawing of a boundary. I was not cleaning house. I was clearing my life. That evening David called. I let the machine pick it up. His voice filled the quiet living room. Hey Mom, just checking in. Hope you had a good first day back. Remember, we're coming over around 10 tomorrow to get started on that sorting. See you then. I stood by the phone listening. There was no question in his voice. No, is that still okay? It was an announcement. An assumption. When the message was over, I pressed the button. Not save, delete. The small electronic beep was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The next morning I was up early. I dressed with care. I chose a simple navy blue dress, the one I usually saved for church. I put on my good shoes. I even put on a bit of lipstick. I was going to a business meeting after all. At 9:30, a taxi I had called for arrived. As I walked down my front path, I saw the box labeled David sitting by the door. A final statement. Mr. Henderson's office was downtown, in one of the newer glass buildings that had sprung up over the last few years. The lobby was cool and smelled of leather and cleaning fluid. It was a world away from my dusty, memory-filled house. It felt clean. It felt anonymous. I liked it. Mr. Henderson was a tall, kind-faced man about David's age. He had a firm handshake and he looked me directly in the eye when he spoke. He didn't talk down to me. He didn't use a loud voice. He led me into his office. He had a picture of his family on his desk. A wife and 2 daughters. They were all smiling. "Pastor John said you needed some legal assistance, Mrs. Williams," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I do," I said. I opened my purse and took out a folder. It contained the deed to my house, my recent bank statements, and the copy of the power of attorney form I had signed 5 years earlier, giving David control over my affairs should I become incapacitated. 5 years ago, I began, my voice even. My son and his wife convinced me to sign a durable power of attorney. They said it was to make things simpler. In case of an emergency, Mr. Henderson nodded, looking at the document. "That's a standard arrangement." "The emergency has arrived," I said. He looked up, his eyebrows raised slightly. "I was under the impression you were recovering well from your fall." "My wrist is healing," I said. "But I have come to realize that my son and I have a different understanding of the word incapacitated. He seems to believe it means inconvenient. I am here today, Mr. Henderson, because I wish to revoke this document." Immediately, he looked at me for a long moment. He didn't question my reasoning. He didn't ask for sordid family details. He just saw the resolve in my face. He nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "We can draft a revocation of power of attorney today. It's a simple procedure. We will file it with the county clerk's office and send a certified letter to your son, informing him of the change." Relief washed over me. So potent it almost made me dizzy. It was that simple. Piece of paper.
À signature.
A stamp. The bars of the cage I hadn't even realized I was in were dissolving. "There is more," I said, my confidence growing. I explained that I wanted to sell my house. I wanted to set up a living trust. I wanted to rewrite my will. I wanted to take every legal and financial tie that bound me to my son's judgment and sever it, cleanly and completely. For the next hour we talked. He explained the legalities in plain, simple English. He told me my options. He was a facilitator, a tool. He provided the mechanisms for my emancipation. He was exactly what I needed. When I signed the first set of papers, revoking the power of attorney, my hand was as steady as it had been when I wrote in the ledger. The pen felt good in my hand. Felt like a weapon. A quiet one. I left his office just before 11 o'clock. I knew David and Susan would be at my house, waiting, probably getting annoyed. I did not go home. I walked to a small diner I knew from years ago, a place that still served coffee in thick ceramic mugs. I ordered a slice of sweet potato pie and a cup of black coffee. I sat in the booth by the window and ate my pie slowly. It tasted of cinnamon and freedom. I was supposed to be at home being sorted. Instead, I was here, living my life, on my own terms. It was the most delicious meal I had ever eaten. Around noon, my phone, which I had placed on the table beside me, began to ring. The screen showed David's face. I watched it ring until it stopped. A moment later, a notification for a new voicemail appeared. I did not listen to it. I deleted it. A few minutes later, a text message from Susan. "Alara, where are you? We've been waiting for an hour. Is everything okay?" I looked at the message. The faint concern. The underlying impatience. I deleted that too. Then I did something I had never done before. I found their numbers in my contacts list and I pressed block. The phone asked me to confirm. "Are you sure you want to block this caller?" I was sure. I paid my bill, left a generous tip, and took a taxi to the library. I spent the afternoon reading. I did not go home until after 5. When I arrived, there was a note taped to my front door. It was from David. His handwriting was an angry scrawl. "Mom, this isn't funny. We were worried sick. Call me the second you get this." I took the note off the door, went inside, and tore it into small pieces. I dropped them into the trash, on top of the pieces of Susan's list. The box with his things was gone from the porch. They had at least gotten that message. The certified letter from Mr. Henderson's office arrived at David's house 2 days later. The phone calls started that evening. Not to my phone, which was now blessedly silent, but to the house landline, which I had forgotten to unplug. I let the answering machine take the calls. The machine was old and the volume was turned up high. I sat in my reading chair, my new quilt on my lap, and I listened to the unraveling. The first message was from David. His voice was tight with confusion and anger. "Mom, I just got a letter from some lawyer. This has to be a mistake. A revocation of power of attorney? What is going on? Did someone put you up to this? Call me." Now an hour later, another message. This time his voice was louder. "Okay, I'm getting really angry now. What is this about? After everything we do for you, this is the thanks we get? You're cutting me out? You can't do that. You're not. You're not capable of making these decisions on your own right now. You just had a fall. You're confused." The third message came near midnight. It was Susan. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but with an edge of steel underneath. "Alara, darling. David is very upset. We are all very upset. We are worried you've been taken advantage of by some predator. This lawyer, we're going to look into him. We are only trying to protect you. Please pick up the phone. Let us help you protect me." They had a funny way of showing it. I listened to each message. I did not feel anger. I felt a profound, bottomless sadness. They couldn't see. They couldn't imagine that I was not a victim, that I was the agent of my own life. My silence, my actions were so far outside their understanding of who I was that they had to invent a villain, a predator lawyer, to make it make sense. The thought that I had simply made a choice, a rational one, was inconceivable to them. And in that, they gave me the final gift. The ultimate validation. Their confusion was the proof that I had done the right thing. The next day, I unplugged the landline. The silence that filled my house was complete. It was wonderful. The for sale sign went up in my yard the following week. It was a simple, elegant sign from a local realtor Mr. Henderson had recommended. No picture of a smiling agent. Just the facts. For sale. By appointment only. The house sold in 3 days. A young family with a little girl who reminded me of Maya fell in love with it. They loved the garden. They loved the big kitchen. They promised to take good care of it. I knew they would. The days between the sale and the closing were a whirlwind of methodical work. I hired a moving company. I packed my life into boxes. I was not sentimental. I was surgical. I divided my belongings into 3 categories. Things to keep. Things to give away. Things to discard. The things to keep were few. My books. My quilts. My photographs of Arthur. My mother's Bible. My gardenia plants, which I carefully repotted. The things to give away were many. I called Pastor John and arranged for the church to take most of the furniture for families in need. I boxed up the good china and silverware for a local women's shelter. The things to discard were the ghosts. David's old report cards. Susan's endless stream of cheerful, empty greeting cards. The detritus of a life spent waiting for them. I threw it all away. It was a baptism. A cleansing. I needed a place to live. I found a small 1-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex across town. It had a balcony that got the morning sun. Perfect for my gardenias. It was clean and bright and held no memories. It was a blank page. During this time, I started going to the senior center near my new apartment. At first, I just sat and drank the weak coffee, keeping to myself. I was observing, learning a new landscape. One afternoon, a woman with sharp eyes and a cloud of white hair sat down at my table without asking. "You're new," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "They all have that look at first," she said, stirring her tea. "Like they've just escaped from somewhere, and aren't sure if they're going to be caught." She looked me right in the eye. "Let me guess. Kids thought you'd be happier in a community," which is code for a place where someone else can watch you so they don't have to. Her directness was startling. And refreshing. I felt a small smile touch my lips for the first time in weeks. "Something like that," I said. "My name's Ally," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm. "Alara," I said. Ally became my friend. My first real friend in years. She was a retired history professor, a widow with no children of her own, only a pack of nieces and nephews she referred to as the vultures. She was wry and funny and deeply cynical, but underneath it all, she was kind. I never told her the whole story of David and Susan. I didn't have to. She understood the broad strokes instinctively. They see a utility bill, not a mother, she said one day as we were playing a game of checkers. They think because they're younger they're smarter. They mistake technology for wisdom. It's the great failing of their generation. She jumped one of my pieces. King me, she said with a grin. Ally's friendship was a bomb. It was a relationship of equals. She didn't want anything from me except my company. She saw me. Alara. Not mom, not grandma, not an elderly woman in need of management. Just Alara. One evening my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, so I answered. It was my granddaughter, Maya. Grandma, she said, her voice small and hesitant. It's me. Maya. I got your new number from Pastor John. My heart softened. Maya had always been a thoughtful child, quiet and observant. Hello, baby, I said. It's good to hear your voice. Yours too, she said. Dad said you were sick. That you moved into a home. But Pastor John said you just moved to a new apartment. The lies they were telling. To their own daughter. It was breathtaking. I'm not sick, Maya, I said calmly. And I did not move into a home. I moved into my own apartment. I sold the house. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her processing this. Oh, she said finally. Dad is really upset. He said you won't talk to him. That's true, I said. It was a simple fact. Not an accusation. Why? She asked, and the question was genuine. It was not the angry, entitled why of her father. It was the curious, pained why of a child who feels the ground shifting beneath her feet. I thought for a moment. What could I tell her that she would understand? Your father and I had a disagreement about my future, I said carefully. He had a plan for me and I had a different one. I chose my plan. He said you're not thinking clearly, she whispered. Maya, I said, and my voice was firm but gentle. I have never in my life thought more clearly than I do right now. Do I sound confused to you? No, she said immediately. You sound calm. I am, I said. I am very calm. Can I come see you when I'm home from school for Thanksgiving? She asked, her voice hopeful. Just me. I would like that very much, baby, I said. I'll make you a sweet potato pie. We said our goodbyes and I hung up. The conversation had not shaken me. It had solidified me. The truth was a simple thing after all. It didn't need shouting. It just needed to be spoken calmly and clearly into a listening ear. The day of the closing was a bright, clear autumn day. I met the new owners at the lawyer's office to sign the final papers and hand over the keys. The little girl gave me a drawing she had made. It was of the house, with a big yellow sun smiling down on it. Afterward, I had a final meeting with Mr. Henderson. We went over the details of the trust one had created. The bulk of my estate, the proceeds from the sale of the house and my savings, would go into a scholarship fund at the local community college, to be administered by my church. The Alara Williams Second Chance Scholarship. For women over 40 going back to school. A portion was set aside for Maya's education. And a donation was made in Ally's name to the women's shelter where she volunteered. My son David was not mentioned. Are you certain about this, Mrs. Williams? Mr. Henderson asked one last time. It is a significant exclusion, Mr. Henderson, I said. My son has been well provided for his entire life. It is time to provide for someone else. He simply nodded and stamped the final document. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought they would give up. But I had underestimated their sense of ownership. Not just of my property but of me. 2 days later they appeared at my apartment. I don't know how they found my address. Perhaps they had followed me. Perhaps they had wheedled it out of someone at the church. It didn't matter. They were there, standing in the hallway outside my door, when I came back from a walk with Ally. David's face was pale and furious. Susan looked like she was about to cry. There you are, David said, his voice a low growl. You've been avoiding us. I have not been avoiding you, David, I said, my voice even. I unlocked my door. I have been living my life. There's a difference, he sputtered, following me inside. Susan trailed behind him, wringing her hands. You sold our home. You gave away our inheritance. You cut us off without a word. I turned to face him in the small, sunlit living room. My living room. It was filled with my things. My books. My quilt draped over the back of the sofa. The air smelled of gardenias and lemon polish. It was my sanctuary, and he was trespassing. "Let me be clear," I said, my voice as quiet as the dust motes dancing in the sunbeam. "I sold my home, and it was never your inheritance. It was my life's work. There is a difference. How could you do this to us?" Susan wailed, the tears finally coming. "We love you. We were only trying to help you." I looked at her perfectly made-up face, her expensive clothes, her look of theatrical distress. And I felt nothing. No anger. No pity. Just a vast, empty distance. "You want to know why?" I asked, my voice still quiet. I walked over to the desk where I kept my ledger. I opened it to the page with their family photo tucked inside. I took it out and held it up. The picture of me on the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus. "This is why." I didn't wait for them to understand the photograph. I didn't need them to. This was for me. "I sat in my own living room," I said. "A house I had lived in for 55 years. A house I brought you home to from the hospital, David. And I listened. I listened to you and your wife discuss my future, as if I were a piece of furniture that had become inconvenient. You talked about clearing out my junk. You talked about putting me in a place. You talked about how much easier your lives would be when mine was neatly filed away." I paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. David had the grace to look ashamed. Susan just looked confused. "You thought I was sleeping. You thought I couldn't hear. But I heard every word. And Susan," I said, turning my gaze to her, "I heard you laugh. You laughed when David said I wouldn't even notice if my things were gone. A small laugh. You probably don't even remember it. But I do. I will remember it for the rest of my life." Silence. Complete and total. The sound of the traffic outside the window seemed very far away. "In that moment," I continued, "I understood everything. I was not your mother. I was your responsibility, and you were tired of it. So I have done you the favor, David. I have relieved you of your responsibility. I am taking care of myself. You are free." David opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Now," I said, walking to the door and opening it, "I would like you to leave my home." He finally found his voice. It was a whisper. "Mom." "I didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't. That was the problem." They left. I closed the door behind them. I did not slam it. I closed it gently and I turned the lock. The click was firm. Final. I went to my balcony and watered my gardenias. The sun was warm on my face. A sense of peace, profound and deep, settled over me. It was not the giddy feeling of victory. It was the quiet, steady feeling of wholeness. The world had been tilted on its axis for a very long time, and I had finally simply set it right. My new life took on a gentle, pleasing rhythm. My days were my own. I woke when I wanted. I ate what I wanted. I read for hours. I took walks with Ally. We'd sit on a park bench and critique the outfits of passersby, our humor dry as autumn leaves. I joined a quilting circle at the senior center. I was teaching a young woman how to do a flying geese pattern. Her hands were clumsy but eager. It felt good to pass something on to someone who wanted to receive it. At Thanksgiving, Maya came to visit. She came alone. She was nervous at first, standing in the doorway of my small apartment, but she relaxed when I hugged her. She looked around the living room. "It's nice, Grandma," she said. "It's bright." "It is," I said. "It's full of light." I had baked her favorite sweet potato pie. We sat at my small kitchen table and ate slices of it while it was still warm. She told me about her classes, her friends, her dreams of being a journalist. She was a good girl, a kind soul. She had a listening heart. She did not press me for details about her father. But before she left, she gave me a long hug. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered into my shoulder, "for whatever he did." "I'm sorry." "It's not for you to be sorry for, baby," I said, stroking her hair. "You just keep being you. That's all I ask." Our relationship was different now. It was ours. Not an extension of her relationship with her father. It was separate, clean. A few months later, a letter arrived. It had been forwarded from the church. The handwriting on the envelope was David's. I recognized the angry slant of it, but it seemed softer somehow, less sure of itself. I let it sit on my desk for 3 days. I was not afraid of it. I was just deciding if I wanted to let his voice back into my quiet world. On the fourth day I opened it. It was a long letter. For pages. He wrote about his childhood. He wrote about Dad. He wrote about how he had always seen me as strong, unflappable, a constant. He said he had taken that constancy for granted. He had mistaken my strength for a lack of needs. He wrote, I never stopped to think about what you wanted. I only thought about what I thought you needed. I was arrogant and I was wrong. He apologized. Not for being caught. Not for losing the money. He apologized for not seeing me. For the conversation in the living room. For the laugh. He wrote, Susan doesn't remember it, but I do. I remember it now. And it makes me sick. It was a good letter. An honest one. The letter of a man who had been shattered and was trying to put the pieces back together in a different shape. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with the ledger. I did not answer it. Not yet. The door was closed. The lock was turned. But I was the only one with the key. And the choice of whether to use it or when was finally blessedly mine. My life was my own. It had taken me 78 years to claim it. And I intended to live every remaining second of it. For me.